So the third most viewed video on my channel is the one that tells you how to tenderize meat the Chinese way, velveting we call it. I had some comments on that video asking if it would work on steaks. Well, today guys, we're gonna find out. Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. If you haven't heard of velveting before, it's a technique that a lot of Chinese takeaways and restaurants use to tenderize cheap cuts of meat. And if you want to see my full video on how to velvet meat, click on this card in the upper corner right now. So in today's experiment, I'm going to velvet one of these two big rump steaks. The other one I'm going to leave as a control and just season. And they're both going to be prepared and cooked in the same way. Now these rump steaks aren't necessarily the most tender cuts of steak. So I think this is the ideal cut of steak to use in this experiment, because if the tenderization works, it's going to make this big steak really nice. I'm really looking forward to doing this experiment because I'm very curious as to how the velveting is going to affect the steak. My heart is hoping that it's really going to work, but my head is thinking that although it will probably tenderize the steak, I think the ingredients are going to affect the flavor a bit too much. So without further ado, let's get on with this because the stakes are really high. And I'm very sorry I just said that. So this is the steak we are going to velvet. As you can see, there's very little marbling in the meat itself, which means that it probably isn't going to be very tender out of the box. So to velvet our steak, we are going to add 1 teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda or baking powder. I know in America, I think baking powder is the same thing. And I'm also going to add 1.5 teaspoons of cornflour or cornstarch. Going to rub this into the steak, coating it as evenly as possible. And obviously this is a chemical way of tenderizing your steak, so it's going to absorb into the meat and we're going to leave it for about an hour. Then afterwards we're going to fry the two steaks off exactly the same way, and we'll see which one is the most tender and if this affects the flavour or not. So there we go guys, I'm just going to set this aside for an hour and then we're going to fry the steaks off. So the steak has been velveting for an hour now, so it's definitely time to rinse off all the cornstarch and all the bicarbonate of soda or baking powder that we've used to velvet it, to make sure that we minimise any taste that it might have given to the steak. Right guys, so these are my two steaks. This one is the control steak. It is untreated. You'll remember it because it looks a little bit like England and Wales but without Scotland. And this is our velveted steak, which I have rinsed off and patted down with kitchen towel. So the next step is to season, and first of all we are going to coat with olive oil. Going to rub this into our steaks so that the seasoning sticks on that little bit better. Turn them over. A little bit more olive oil. There you go. And for the seasoning, I've got some salt, some ground black pepper and some garlic powder just to give it some extra flavour. So I'm going to generously sprinkle this mixture onto the steaks. Right guys, now it's time to cook the steak. And to do this, I'm going to use a method known as the reverse sear technique. And what that means is we're going to put the steaks into a very low oven, which is gas mark 1, 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 135 degrees centigrade. And we're going to leave them in the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how thick the steaks are. And what this will give us is a really nice medium to medium rare steak. And after they've come out the oven, we're going to sear them for about 60 to 90 seconds on each side, and that will give us a perfect steak. The beauty of this technique is it gives you a wider margin of error, and that means that you've got a much better chance of cooking the perfect steak for you. So these are the steaks after they've come out of the oven. As you can see, they've gone a bit grey, but searing them on a hot pan or a skillet or a barbecue is going to sort that out. I'm just going to use a plain old frying pan for this. Right guys, moment of truth. Let's see what these bad boys are really like. So we're going to start off with the untreated steak. So this is the untreated steak. And this cuts exactly how you'd expect a steak to cut. It's got some resistance to it. Doesn't feel the most tender, but let's see what it tastes like. Flavour is very good. It is slightly chewy, but not unacceptable. If I had that as a standalone steak, in which case I've just bought myself a fairly reasonably priced steak, I'd be very happy with that. Taste, the seasoning works really well. The way it's been seared, spot on. It's got that crust to it, the flavour, the saltiness, all very nice indeed. So let's see what the velveted steak is like. Oh, I've got to say this cuts a lot easier. So obviously the velveting has had some effect. Let's see what it tastes like. Well, straight away you can tell it's melting in the mouth. The velveting has really worked. It feels like a much more expensive steak. However, there is a slight taste coming in from the cornflour and the sodium bicarbonate, or the baking powder. It's got that slightly baking powder kind of flavour. It's not wholly unpleasant, but you do notice it. However, it's not as bad as I actually thought it would be. When I first started this experiment, I really thought it would be very, very strong. And to some people, I guess it might be, because if you're used to just having a normal steak, then you're possibly not going to like this. So my thoughts on this are that the velveting does work. However, it does leave that taste in your mouth, and a lot of people are not going to tolerate that. They're not going to like it. So I don't think it's probably the best way to tenderize a steak. But this experiment has really piqued my curiosity. So in my next video, I'm going to try to find more ways and more techniques of tenderizing steak, and I'm going to see if I can find the perfect way to tenderize a steak. So to see that video, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you hit the notification bell, and you'll get notified when that video comes out. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.